Hello. Okay, so today we're going to be a little more philosophical, and I just want to speak a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci because I've been reading his biography, and I know that makes me sound super nerdy, but I've been reading it forever. It's a huge book, and it's really good. It's written by Walter Isaacson, the same person who wrote Steve Jobs' biography. And yeah, there's just so much in it. So it's definitely kind of a slow and processing type read where you take some time to digest. But I have just been absolutely fascinated by him and his perspectives on life and just his heightened level of awareness, which obviously he had hundreds of years ago before any of us were really even talking about mindfulness or meditation or mindset work or neuroscience or any of that. It is absolutely fascinating, just the capacity and the intelligence that he had. And what he really was, though, just kind of giving a summation of the whole book so far because I'm almost done with it, is that he was just a super keen master of observation. So he would spend hours, literally hours, sometimes even days, just studying like one insect or the way that air moves over a bird's wings. Or he would study water and the different currents under different energies and just the way that it moves and shapes and takes different forms. And he would study, what else did they talk about? I mean, for his portraits, obviously other human beings and just the way that their long curls just rested on their skin of their shoulder. And he was just so hyper aware of the finest, smallest details. And so to me, that just means he is the true artist in that way. I guess what I'm trying to say there is a true artist is really always paying attention and they are mastering that art of observation. And so he had mastered that as a way of mindfulness in his own sense without really even knowing it. And we hear a lot about mindfulness today, but he was doing exactly that. And I feel like it is so impactful just to hear about the way that he was really just completely absorbed in what he was doing at the moment in his studies, obviously when he was out with his rendezvous in nature, and just take what we can from that and ingrain it into our own lives and be able to pay attention to where we are and our surroundings and even those micro details that we're usually missing most of the time. So he really could just see what others couldn't see because he was paying attention so closely. And with this superpower, basically, he was able to make those intelligent inferences that he gathered for his art and his science and his engineering. One big inference that he made that just really stood out to me because I'm just constantly listening to this book and obviously there's a lot of information, but this one just really kind of impacted me and made me think. And it was based on his studies, just like I mentioned, of plants and animals and nature as a whole. And obviously he's paying very close attention. And he made this inference that anything that moves, so obviously an animal per se, can feel pain for a reason, and anything that is stagnant or stationary like plants doesn't feel any pain. And again, this is from a whole conclusive kind of analysis and his observation of clearly thousands of different species and life forms. And he inferred that obviously anything that can feel pain needs to have that developed in their nervous system and in their anatomy to keep them safe. So it's a way to keep their body safe and survive and obviously preserve their bodily systems, and a way to tell them which way they need to move, right? If something's painful, then they want to move away from that and towards something else because that's clearly impeding or infringing on their survival. And so obviously we as humans can feel pain, right? And for a good reason, because pain is there to show us which way to move. We are not plants. We are not trees. I'm looking at my tree outside my window. We are not stationary and stagnant, right? We need pain, whether that's physical pain, like putting your hand on a hot stove and realizing like, ooh, that's not what I want, or emotional pain, right? Like we have a breakup or we lose a loved one or you receive some harsh criticism. That is all pain, and it is all there for a reason to show us which direction to move. If we can observe and get curious like Leonardo da Vinci and recognize that there's information in that pain and there's guidance in that pain, which is showing us which direction that we want to move towards. The interesting thing about pain, though, is that most of us, and I've obviously been guilty of this myself and probably will continue to be in the future because I am very human, but most of us have spent a lifetime avoiding pain and a lifetime trying to be more like plants and less like the animals that we're closer to, or obviously our human form. This is because I've talked about this a lot before, but we have these imprints from when we were very young, and they're in our nervous system now and in our subconscious mind. And a lot of those imprints happened because they were painful events, right? If something is very painful or emotional for you, whether it could also be emotional in a positive way, but in a negative way, it's going to imprint on your system. And then we carry that with us. So like many of us, if not all of us, if you've experienced a loss of a loved one at an early age, or you've experienced your first heartbreak super young, or bullying just by the kids at school, or whatever it is, you have felt that pain and it's deep and it hurts, right? And so we spend a lot of our latter lives trying to avoid that pain or numb that pain with depressants and stimulants, and those don't have to be drugs either, right? Those could be overworking or shopping or sleeping all the time, or there's just so many ways that we cope, and it's not our fault or it's not a bad thing per se. It's just what we're doing in a survival kind of mechanism to avoid feeling the pain. But we don't want to feel this pain because, just like I mentioned, it often has a message for us. It has information for us. And a lot of the time, it's just information that we may not be ready to hear or don't want to hear, because that information is telling you or showing you which way to move. It's guidance. But oftentimes we think of moving as change, and change is loss, right? So maybe the information is that you need to leave that relationship, or it's time to move on from the current job that you're in, or close that business and start a new one and admit that that one just didn't work out and it's time to do something new, or moving physically, literally, like across the country, like I did, 4 years ago now, maybe a little bit more, and just leaving all of your family and friends and the lifestyle that you knew and kind of the roots and the network that you built, and uprooting yourself and moving to a different area just because you're not feeling completely satisfied. You're feeling pain. And for me, when I finally stopped avoiding receiving that message, because it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted to stay in New York and I wanted to be around my friends and my family and be part of that lifestyle, but it wasn't entirely me, and it wasn't me maybe anymore, and I was ready for growth in different areas. So I had to be able to feel that and receive that message for myself. So my advice to you, if I can offer any, is to become more receptive to pain. Open yourself up to it, because when you become more receptive to pain, you're also becoming more receptive to pleasure. It's the same receptors, right? It's the same nervous system. We only have one way of feeling our senses and processing those senses, and it's the same system for pleasure and pain. So you're essentially becoming more sensitive, right? Because you can feel both of those extremes very deeply. And sensitivity is honestly a superpower. And even speaking for myself, I was always an extremely sensitive person. And just based on culture and conditioning, I thought sensitivity was a burden. And I hated the fact that I was sensitive. And I did everything I could to prove that I was not sensitive and that it didn't affect me and that I was like this tough badass that nothing really could penetrate or get to me, right? And I think a lot of us spend our lives like that. And for me, because I was so avoidant to feeling that pain, I often would stray towards more staying stimulated, right? I would constantly overwork myself, or I would travel excessively and just kind of stay on that high of traveling or moving a lot. I moved like every year and a half to like a new location within New York City for most of the time. But still, just like that stimulation of a new place, a new neighborhood, new faces. And I would party a lot and even kind of create drama in my life, right? Like stir things up a little bit. And that way I'm just always stimulated. I'm distracted from what I really need to feel and hear. But once you or I in this situation kind of turn yourself away from that, then you're really not fully living. Because again, if you can't feel the pain and you're numb to it, or avoiding it, then you also can't feel the pleasure. And that being said as well, it's unsustainable to keep avoiding it, right? I would constantly go, keep myself distracted and stimulated and be on this like high all the time. But you only have so much energy and attention that you can give to staying in that space, right? Eventually you're going to burn out, which I think is a lot of what burnout is about these days and what I work with people on often, especially more recently. But just like that constant stimulation of always staying distracted and getting your energy from an unsustainable source, because eventually that energy is going to run out. You only have so much energy and capacity. And then for me, I would be left just feeling really low and depressed and very just low energy and uninvolved in my life. And then I would oscillate back up because I'd be feeling bad. I'd be feeling low and depressed, and I wouldn't want to feel that. And so I would get, maybe stay in that depression for a bit until my body could get some energy back and then go right back to staying stimulated. So I almost picture it like a roller coaster, right? Like you're hopping on and you have this wild ride and so much fun, but then it has to end at some point and you have to get off. And if you want to get back on the roller coaster, you're going to have to get back in this super long, boring line, and you're going to have to really sit with yourself and what's coming up for you while you wait for that next roller coaster ride. And that was basically the oscillation that I was on, and I believe and know that it's the oscillation that many of us are on, even if it's maybe not that extreme. So to come back fully alive, I had to find sustainable pleasure, right? Not this quick hit kind of fix it pleasure or staying stimulated because I'm avoiding something. Real sustainable pleasure that I could return to at any time. And that really just started with me noticing little things in my life, like really little things. And it sounds crazy because obviously now I've come a long way with that, but I really had to notice just how lucky I was to be able to have a hot shower in the morning and feel that water running over me, or on a walk, just the way that the leaves were moving in the wind and just really cluing into that. Or I remember even just tasting blueberries. I love blueberries, and like the way they would just pop in your mouth and that sweet little tart taste would hit your tongue. Or even just when I was around people, just really leaning into that sensitivity that I knew I had, but I had been closed off to, or keeping myself away from, but leaning into that sensitivity around people and just noticing the loving ways that we all communicate with each other, right? Through gestures or glances with their eyes or just a little smile, just noticing those little nuances. And by doing that, I was able to make myself again, or maybe I was just reopening myself, whatever, just release that avoidance to pain and make myself more receptive to pleasure, right? And kind of dialing up both of those receptors again and reawakening them. And I really feel, as simple as it sounds, this is the way to feel fully alive. Just starting with those little things and becoming like a little Leonardo da Vinci and just getting so present and aware of all of the good things you have in your life, because I don't care what your life looks like, you have them. You absolutely have them. Everybody does, from, every spectrum and walk of life. There is great, beautiful things in your life. So just becoming aware of them and receptive to them, and then allowing yourself to feel that full range of emotions, just those highs and the lows and the lights and the darks and everything in between. Because as humans, we are whole beings. We will always hold all of those emotions and all of those forms within us. And so being able to receive and have the capacity to hold all of that is what makes us human and just fully alive. So I would ask that you just open yourself up, allow yourself to feel that full range of emotions, receive that information, and then move.